Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this very unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers, where we profile these killers while enjoying award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only award-winning winemaker in the world that's actually captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine. So this is real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on all of our podcast stations. Remember, we're on Spotify, YouTube, we're on Apple, and now on iHeartRadio. Well, together, Brandy joins me, and we go on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world, while enjoying our favorite wines. Now, I've got my favorite Casaro wine today, our Primitivo. But we'll talk about that a little later. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. Now, in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Dean Correll, a former candy company worker who learned to lure children at a young age, hence the nickname the Candyman, before graduating to murder. And not only did he kill, he recruited others to kill along with him. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a unique case because this killer recruited others to assist him with kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder. Brandy, how do you feel if somebody approached you with that kind of offer?
I can't say that's actually happened before, but if it was, it better be more for than just candy. But he was able to, bring young boys into his candy factory, lure them with gifts of drugs, alcohol, candy, and he targeted specific people with his murders, and the two boys that actually accompanied him in committing some of these crimes.
Yeah, he had two accomplices that admitted to multiple murders, and that's what we're going to get into in this episode of the Candyman Killer.
All right, John, we are going to be talking about Dean Correll today. I want to say the original Candyman. As you know, there's been Candyman movies, Candyman stories, but he is the official Candyman of Texas. Dean Correll's born December 24th, 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He dies in 1973, August 8, 1973 in Pasadena, Texas. He is an American serial killer who abducted, raped, tortured, murdered, humiliated at least 28 teenage boys and young men in the Houston, Texas area between the years of 1970 and 1973. He is known as the Candyman because he would give free candy from his family's business. They owned a candy factory, and he actually owned and operated John, some of the actual things that were happening in the candy factory early on, but he had accomplices to come in and to create these Houston mass murders. So we're going to get into a lot of the details and a lot of the gory details, really, that go along with what this guy is doing. But first and foremost, we want to talk about the formative years, the early years of Dean Correll. So what do we know?
Yeah, and I think that's really important because honestly, Brandy, he earned the nickname the Candyman long before he started killing people.
That's
By
right.
the time he was older and started killing these young boys, he was luring them with other things than candy. But very, very unique that even as a youngster, as a teenager himself, working in the candy factory, which, by the way, was located at one time across from a elementary school, he would give out candy. He'd invite young boys into the candy factory, where he even set up a pool table and they could play pool, eat candy. So he was grooming victims from a very young age and, unfortunately, learning his trade. Now, his parents were married, they were divorced, they were remarried, they were divorced again throughout his childhood. I think his mom had a total of 3 divorces. Dean was kind of a scrawny youngster, had a heart murmur, told to avoid PE or sports, so that automatically starts, segmenting you in school, as you know that when things like that happen. His mother, during one of her marriages, married a clock salesman and moved the family to Vidor, Texas. And they started a small candy company in their garage, and it actually expanded so much that they ended up, moving to Houston and opening one. And even after her divorce, her husband kept running another candy company. So he kind of grew up with candy. He worked with the machines. He'd wrap the candy, and would work at the candy factory before and after attending high school. We know that he occasionally dated girls, but they didn't seem to be his thing, and he played a trombone in the school band. So no real glaring red flags there at all, Brandy, in the early years, other than kind of a tumultuous home life in his mother marrying and divorcing and marrying, the same man twice, and then finally getting divorced and marrying somebody else. He graduated from high school, and at about that time, the family actually moved the candy company from the garage in Vidor to a bungalow in Houston. And he, of course, went with them and did that. He lived briefly with his grandmother back in Indiana for a little while. And we heard that he had actually dated a girl up there who apparently proposed to him, but he rejected that. Probably a really good move for that young woman. His mom, after the second divorce, I think it was, had a pecan candy company, and she opened up the Corel candy company there in Houston. And Dean went back home to help her with the company. They made him vice president, and he started working basically full time at the candy factory. But here's our first red flag, because there's always red flags, right?
Right.
Well, he was still a young man working at the candy company. Another young male employee complained that Carell made sexual advances to him.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of checking into it, the mother simply fired the kid that complained. So certainly we see that as a red flag. And then looking back on him inviting very young kids into the candy company to play pool. And I'm talking, we know he invited kids that were like 6th grade.
Yes,
We're
12,
talking
13 years
12,
old. Mhm.
12 and 13 years old. I mean, what do you make of that?
Pedophilia is probably lingering his mind, wanting younger, being attracted. Well, I think the fact he was dating girls and then he starts luring boys or wanting to be by young boys. I mean, he's showing the tendencies of not being just homosexuality, or maybe a little confusion around that in his own self, but really younger boys who are not of age, which is a whole different thing than dating young men as a man, right? So
yeah, he was in his late teen years by this time, getting ready to graduate high school. And so a 17, 18-year-old boy hanging around and inviting 12 and 13-year-olds in, even though that's not a huge age disparity, certainly a red flag for me.
Yeah. and certainly, if it ever advances to something else, which it does, becomes illegal, which then maybe the sadistic thoughts he had about these young men and what his to me, because I've studied Dean Corll, and his thoughts of power and holding these boys hostage in a way. We'll end up talking about this and some of the things he did to them, but I think his urges for younger boys are then going to turn into the fact that he can't really. These are young men who can speak up, right? These are young men that can talk about what they've experienced, just like the employees spoke up and then the mother fires him, right? So lack of accountability already, thinking he can get away with it, it's already gotten away with once. So I think these tendencies are just starting to form in different ways.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as we've seen in several cases, he does get drafted into the U.S. Army in 1964. So gets out of high school and gets drafted. But this is very interesting. He only served 10 months. He served at Fort Polk and Benning and at Fort Hood here in Texas. But he applied for a hardship that said he had to attend to family business needs and was granted the hardship after only 10 months in the service. I thought that was just very, very interesting. 1965, we're amping up for the Vietnam War. A lot of people are getting drafted. What really happened in the service that they allowed him out after only 10 months? And we do learn later that he had his first homosexual experiences while he was in the service. So maybe that's a common thing to grant hardships like that for business reasons after only 10 months. I don't know, but I thought that was pretty unique too.
Well, and I also think that this may have been when he realized he wanted to involve himself in more homosexual activity that he probably may not have been able to do in the military. I think that attending to the family business, who knows what that could have been. Maybe his mother was ill, or maybe, I don't know how much they have to prove these kinds of things. And
Right,
so
right.
maybe to keep the business functioning, he was asked to then come back, and then they just grant it. But to me, I think he's realizing this is not a place he wants to be. He's starting to have more urges, and he was kind of already in the thick of forming those ideas and thoughts before he went into the service.
Yeah, no, I think so exactly. So kind of to, set up his career really revolved around the candy company, working there as a teenager. And as we said, it was located once they moved to Houston, right across the street from elementary school. And he was known to give candy to the children. But I thought this was interesting, especially to the young boys. He set up a pool table in the back of the candy factory and would host parties there, which again, if I've got an elementary school student or even a child that's 13, 14, I'm kind of leery about him going and attending parties, but you know what? It was a candy company, so that's a pretty good cover, I guess. Um, he actually worked there for the next several years, getting out of the military in 65. He worked there till 68 when his mother went through a third divorce and decided to move to Colorado. Well, in doing that, she closed down the candy company and then eventually opened another one up in Colorado. But Dean stayed put. He actually went to work as an electrician for Houston Lighting and Power and rose to the ranks of a supervisor. The comments on his job evaluations said he was polite, he was neat, and he actually worked there at the power company until the day he died.
I did find it kind of interesting about. So I think the candy company was the perfect cover up. We're talking 1960s soda fountains, candy companies, kids going in, family-owned businesses, right? They're at the candy store.
Yep.
And there's multiple boys around. So what could possibly go wrong in a public place where people come to visit, where a lot of kids probably went after school to get a piece of candy before going home? I think that created a lot of trust.
As a mom, I mean, if you heard, that your child was just going to the candy company after school and getting candy, is that what you're thinking? Wow, it's got to be okay. There's adults there. There's other kids there. It's a business, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was like the popular thing to do, was like to go to the soda fountain, to go to the candy store. I mean, you get a treat after school. I mean, I didn't grow up in 1960s, but just thinking back to movies and parents and what they talked about, I mean, that was just such an exciting thing for kids, even at 12 and 13 years old. But now they're getting to play pool and they're getting to socialize, which, maybe some of them struggled with that. It was a very inviting environment.
You're so young, Brandy. I did grow up in the 60s, and you're right. The soda fountains, and that's where you socialized. And as you're a 12, 13, 14-year-old boy, you're trying to get out. You're trying to visit with people. You're trying to experience your social self. And if you feel that it's a comforting, safe environment, then you want to be there. So I agree with you. I think it was a perfect cover. Let's turn our attention, though, now. And 68, the candy company went out of business, and he went to work at Houston Power and Light. So his candy days were kind of over. But in 1967, so a year before that, Corell befriended a 12-year-old named David Brooks. He was a sixth grader who came to the candy factory like those other children, and he gave him candy. But then Corell and Brooks all of a sudden had some type of connection, and he would invite Brooks with him down to the beaches at Galveston and Corpus Christi and other South Texas beaches on trips. And I thought that was quite unusual. We then know that he started giving him money when he needed. So when Brooks wanted to buy something, Corell would give him the money. Brooks said that he saw Corell as a father figure, even though by 1969, just 2 years later, after he started grooming him, Corell was paying Brooks to have sex with other young males. And that really changed Brooks's life from then on, because by the time he was 15, he dropped out of high school, right? Yeah. Lost all those social connections and actually lived on and off at Corell's apartment for the next several years. So we see this David Brooks as a young person that was lured in and that was groomed. And then all of a sudden, we're raising it to the level of sexual relationships, sexual activity, other young men being involved, and that kind of became his life.
Yeah, and it is a total situation of grooming, and then giving it, years and years of it, and then pushing the boundaries just a little bit more, seeing how much Brooks would actually do. And, sadly it happens. You and I both have covered cases and seen where this occurs. And then he just becomes an accomplice with some of this stuff. So yeah, definitely. I've seen interviews and him speak before about this, and definitely changed his life.
Yeah. It was a downward trajectory, literally from 12 years old on. So in profiling, throughout the case, we always profile the killers, the comfort zones, victimology, looking at his early childhood, his background growing up, even up to his military career and everything. We don't see a whole lot of red flags, honestly. We don't see the substance abuse by the parents. We don't see the sexual abuse by the parents. We don't see abusive behavior by parents or siblings or anyone. No mental health issues that we know of. Physical characteristics. Yeah, I know he had a heart murmur, maybe kept him out of some physical activities like sports and everything, but nothing that I would check the red flag box with. Certainly intelligent. He was
Yeah.
intelligent enough, graduated high school, went into the military. Um, really wasn't a loner unless you say he picked and chose what groups he wanted to be in. He was charismatic, right? He was
Yeah.
able to reach out, talk to these kids, charismatic in the way that he was able to lure them. And I think he gained and developed those skills. We don't know anything about animal abuse, but certainly from a pretty young age when he started interacting with these 12 and 13-year-old males, we see some deviant behavior there.
Well, and some of those early red flags that you touched on earlier was the teenage employee that was fired for those sexual advances, having a sexual relationship with a 12-year-old, in 1967, paying him for then sex in 69. So that we're starting to see the advances of his urges. I would say urges, and really the sexuality of young men.
Yeah, and by 1970, he was starting to already commit crimes. He was actively luring teenage boys to his apartment. He would give them rides. He'd say, hey, let's go to parties. He'd offer them alcohol. He'd offer them drugs. We've seen this over and over and over again. So I thought it was quite interesting that his nickname's the Candyman, and that certainly is where he honed his skills luring young boys. But he's an adult now, and he's doing very adult things to lure young children, young men at this point. He had been grooming Brooks now for several years,
Yeah.
treating him like a son, but then exploiting him.
Yeah.
So it's and many people said this that Dean Carell had almost two personalities, that he could be charming and nice, and yet he was horribly cruel and sadistic at
Yeah.
the same time. And do you think with Brooks, maybe he was nice to him?
Mhm.
Took him to parties, took him on trips, gave him money, but at the same time used him and abused him sexually?
Oh, well, no doubt about it. I mean, I think the intentions were always to groom him and then to possibly involve him. Because if you have a younger man who is able to connect with other younger men and build that trust, Dean basically it's just like a little fishing pole, right? He throws them out there and brings others back in. And that's kind of what he did with Brooks. I mean, I think that was his MO eventually or he just started to have these more indulgent thoughts about what to do with young boys, and then he kind of pivoted to making Brooks sort of that accomplice with him. So it's hard to tell, but the urges were continuing to grow.
Yeah, it's certainly continuing to grow. And we know his first known victim was September 25th, 1970. Jeffrey Conan, white male, 18. He was hitchhiking from Austin, where he went to school at UT, back to Houston. He was actually last seen in Houston, where him and his buddy had gotten dropped off. And so he was on the last leg of his trip, you might say. He was seen in the Uptown area. And forensics determined that he had been strangled to death when they found his body, which wasn't, by the way, till 3 years later. And we're going to get to all those crimes in between then. But they didn't find his body till 3 years later. It was nude. It was under a piece of cement. It was covered with a layer of lime. Obviously, somebody tried to cover up their crime. It was wrapped in plastic, and he was bound hand and foot. So this was not just an accident. This was very intentional, very pre-planned. Whoever did it had the tools they needed to pick him up to subdue him, to torture him, to strip him, and then to dispose of the body in a way that he didn't want it found. So as we start looking at the very, very first parts of this criminal profile, we're seeing a very organized killer.
That's right.
A killer that had premeditation and planning, that had tools. And I would give you a killer that had been practicing. You know, he may not have killed up to this point, but certainly he knew how to obtain the victims, transport the victims, secure the victims with handcuffs or duct tape or whatever, and then commit his sexual acts before murdering him. So to me, we're already starting to see the very beginnings of a very organized killer that knows what he wants to do and knows how to do it.
Well, and you don't just know to use cement and lime, right? You have to, he's researching this stuff. I mean, and some of these bodies are found in very public places, we'll eventually find out. So, you know, I agree. He was definitely organized, using lime, cement. I mean, that blocks smell, that blocks the ability to dig anyone up. You know, you're going to hit cement. So some people will just think that's underneath the ground. So there's, I mean, we're talking a lot of bodies that were eventually recovered from this guy.
Right. And we don't think that anyone helped him with the first murder. And if that was his first, we're actually still, you know, we're going to talk at the end of the show about DNA and technology. We talk about this all the time, how we're clearing cases, especially from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And this is another instance where there may be many other victims before this one, but we know that Carell was doing it by himself up to September 25th. But then, shortly after Conan's murder, Brooks, who we now know is living on and off with Carell in his apartment and being groomed by him, he comes in and interrupts Carell in the act of sexually assaulting not one, but two teenage boys that Carell is strapped to the bed.
Yep.
Well, Carell knows he's kind of caught red-handed, so he tells Brooks, listen, be quiet. Don't say anything about this. And if you don't, I'll buy you a car.
Yep.
Brooks accepts the offer, and Carell buys him a green Corvette after that. After the incident, though, Carell tells Brooks that, yeah, thanks for being quiet, because I raped him, and I strangled him, and I killed him, and I buried him under the boat shed. And oh, by the way, Brooks, as long as you're being silent about this, how about if you make some money and I'll give you $200 for any boy that you can lure to my apartment? Wow.
Well, he's going all in on Brooks. I think he knows he has enough power and control over him to be able to approach him with this kind of thing. And I also think he's using the dad card. I mean, he's giving him a car. He's going to give him a $200. I mean, what is that now from 1970?
I think it's around $1,250. I actually did the conversion.
Right? To a young guy, that's a ton of money. And at that point, I think under, sadly, Brooks maybe appreciates Coral for some things in his life. And so, maybe he knows right from wrong and understands that it's wrong, but then maybe the urge and what he has going on with him is something he kind of likes and has never had in his life. So,
but that's a huge step.
Right?
Isn't that a huge step, going from I won't say anything to I'll get paid to bring victims to you, especially when he knows that he's not just raping him, which is bad enough. He's
Yeah.
raping him, he's torturing him, and he's killing him.
I know.
I mean, Brooks knows this, and yet still agrees to do it. Sometimes we just can't wrap our mind around these guys, and this is one of the times that I'm not having a problem with Corell, right? I
Right.
know what he's doing and why he's doing it, but
Right.
I'm having a huge problem with Brooks. I'm having a huge problem making that leap from being quiet to actively participating in murders.
But do you think it's because well, first of all, he's been sexually abused and groomed by this guy, right? So mentally that does something to you. There's like, I don't know. Do you think that he thought this could be a better life for him, even though he had to do something bad? He's able to get paid for it. He's going to have a car. He has Carell, who really cares about him. He probably feels that he really cares about him as a person. And so I don't know. It's like the good versus evil. Like which am I going to choose? I don't know. I think there may have just because I've seen Brooks in interviews, and I think he battled with this. I think he battled with maybe knowing what was happening wasn't right, but then the not having the ability to just say no to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this really shows the power of grooming somebody.
Oh my gosh.
So 6 weeks later, Brandy, we have Brooks and Corell out, and they spot two brothers walking home. They lured him into Corell's van and drove them to his apartment, where they raped, strangled, killed him, and buried him in the boat shed. Two brothers.
Yeah.
This is the first crime that we know that Brooks was an active participant. And between March and May of 71, Corell and Brooks would kill 3 more teenagers. And so they're on quite a spree right now, and quite a killing team.
Yeah, and not much time goes by. We've got one a month, right? March, April, and May of 71. What do you think Brooks is feeling at this point? Do you feel like he has I look at them as now equals in this. I feel like at any time Brooks could have called the police or, gone to police or told someone what was happening. But I don't know. I don't know if the power of him was just so mighty that he wasn't able to break free from it. Or again, did he just like the money and what he was getting out of it because nobody had ever been that good to him, right? And
yeah, I don't know. Dropped out of school at 15, lived on and off at his apartment, saw him as a father figure. You really don't know, but it is a huge step from being quiet to murder. And now they're picking up young boys, taking them back to their apartment. So let's talk about the MO a little bit. We know they're luring the victims, inviting them to parties, giving them rides, whatever they need to. They're restraining them with handcuffs and force to get them restrained. But Corell also developed out of marine grade plywood a torture board that they would chain the victims to. And it would use this torture board from here on out. They would beat the boys. They would sexually assault them. They'd mutilate their genitals. Each of the boys was strangled with a cord or a rope or shot with a .22 caliber gun that Corell owned. They often wrapped the bodies in plastic, sometimes put lime over them. And so their MO as really sadistic killers is starting to come together here. So as we start developing a profile of the MO of these killers, that's what we're seeing. And there were rumors, and it was never proven, that Brooks or somebody was also linked to a Dallas-based sex ring selling young boys. So I don't think they fully figured that out yet, but certainly we know that these two guys are out on the prowl looking for victims.
Well, and you have certain things like inserting objects, genital mutilation. I mean, this is pure torture, pain, watching these young men go through this, plucking hairs. I mean, they're kind of finding anything to cause infliction. But not
Pain.
only go ahead.
No pain, violent
Pain.
pain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and not only that, they have the psychological manipulation, right? So we talk about keeping trophies, and he ended up, and we even talked a few killers that made their victims write letters. So he forced the victims to write letters to home, kept trophies like keys, different things that the young men may have had on them, and then accomplices described him as two people yet sadistic. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, one of the things we know, not only did they have the kids write letters, which what did they do? The kid's missing and they
Yeah.
wrote a letter saying they're okay and mailed it to the parents because at this point Houston parents are starting to get into uproar as children are disappearing. But
That's
we
weird.
know at least in a couple of instances they let him use the phone and told him to call home, tell him they're okay. They're at a party. I mean,
And out of
this is
town. There was one
yeah.
he said that he was on spring break or was going out of town. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous, but we've seen that before, right?
Yep.
With the soap maker, the serial killer that would lure women into her soap shop and have them write letters to their family saying, hey, I'm getting married or I'm getting a job and I'm leaving town. I'm okay, before killing them. And so we've seen this psychological manipulation in the past. But, you know, in Houston, as in anywhere where young kids disappear, the search becomes frantic
Yep.
because now we've got, what are we up to, 5 you said? I'm not sure, maybe even 6 or 7 at this point. And we've got parents of some of the victims launching a frantic search. They're making posters, they're establishing rewards, they're recruiting people to put up posters, and they're looking for the boys. Maybe that's what got Carell to say, well, if they call home or they write a letter, maybe it'll take some of the heat off us and they won't be searching for these kids. But again, that's planning, that's preparation, that's premeditation. This guy is evil and sadistic. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And what I have today is our Primitivo. And if you're familiar with Primitivo, you know it's an Italian-style Zinfandel. It has aromas of cherries and flavors of blackberries. And this dry red wine pairs well with any pizza, calzone, and any pasta dish you can think of. Primitivo is fantastic. And of course, there's no better wine for listening to your favorite podcast than our Primitivo as you enjoy our true crime and wine.
Okay, well, starting in 1971, again, we have more abductions and more murders. July, we've got Donald Falcon. August, Reuben Haney. In September, we have 2 unknown victims abducted and kept for 4 days until murdered. Again, looking at the torture piece of this and the satisfaction that these men were getting out of this. Brooks remembered these 2 because it was right before Wayne Henley started helping them with the murders. So we mentioned earlier he had as a second accomplice that comes on. That is Wayne Henley, but they're still continuing this spree, John.
Yeah, and not only continuing it, they're adding to it. And I thought it was unique when they did interview Brooks and say, you don't even know the names of these victims. He goes, no, but I remember it because it's the last 2 before Wayne joined us. And so now in September of 1971, we see one of Brooks's friend, Elmer Wayne Henley. They were friends in school. They were both suspended from school together at one point. and Brooks brought him to Carell's house as a victim. So
Yes.
Brooks brings Henley to Carell's house as a victim, is going to get paid the $200 for it. But for whatever reason, Carell made a connection with Henley
Yep.
and said, hey, you know what? You may want to join us. And if you help lure other young boys into it, I'll give you $200 a kid also. Henley was kind of reluctant to doing that, and he didn't do it until February of 72, later telling police the reason he gave in is his family needed money. But come on, there's a lot of ways to make money.
Yeah.
Maybe in 1971, you're not going to make over $1,000, but for bringing a kid to be raped and tortured, Henley said he thought it was originally just for some type of slavery ring, a young male, white male slavery ring. But what we do know from this point forward, February 72, Carell, Brooks, and Henley participated in numerous murders and abductions together, and Henley was a willing and able accomplice.
Yeah, we always say it's hard to talk one person into doing this, but now you've been able to talk two people into doing this.
Yep.
And we also say the more people that know about your secret, the more likely you're going to get caught, which will be eventually his demise on this. But they started killing spree. So the remainder of 72 going into 73, all three of them embark on a killing spree in which Brooks said Henley, becomes more sadistic with the torture, and Carell had a bloodlust that continued to grow. So, I don't know. Did they all three have their own specific urges and feelings when it came to doing these crimes? But Carell was now moving apartments frequently to avoid detection. So he's not trying to get caught. Do you know why he started moving to apartments where people seeing young men come and go?
Yeah, I think it was just a matter of avoiding detection. There's always some degree of yelling, screaming. We know he turned up the radio to try to muffle the sounds. But, you're in an apartment. People complain it's too noisy over there. There's too many people going in and out. So we know he's living in a number of different places during this period trying to avoid detection, which also, again, tells you this is organized, this is planned, this is premeditated. But I thought it was interesting that as they're on this crime spree, this trio, this crime spree of killing, that one night Carell hits Brooks so hard he knocks him unconscious, and then he ties him to the torture board and repeatedly rapes him. But then lets him go. And to Brooks, it's almost like, well, no harm, no foul. I guess it was my turn. Because he continued to work with Carell and Henley and continued to lure more boys. And during this period, Brandy, as many as 19 boys were killed. So the murders began in 70. In 71, he recruited Brooks. In 72, Henley came into play. I think it was February, if I remember right. But in 72 and 73, when the trio were working their hardest, we know at least 19 boys, and probably many, many more, were raped, tortured, abducted, and killed by this trio.
Yeah, and I don't know. I wonder, he knocks Brooks unconscious. Again, it's like this. I don't know, was he in such fear of what Carell could do? He's seen what he does to other boys. Did he just not want, did he want to live? And so he just cooperated. I mean, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, at this point, I really can't tell. I'm not getting into the mind of these guys. Again, Carell's pretty straightforward, a sadistic, power-hungry serial killer, organized. Nothing big for that. Henley, it seems, grows into the role.
Yeah.
And a matter of fact, evidence is that he becomes even more sadistic throughout these murders. And then Brooks is kind of that misfit, right? And he wants to get away. He can't get away. He's getting raped. He's getting beaten. And yet he continues to help. So we know kind of again the MO on the trio now is they're luring victims to various apartments at this point, and eventually the final house that Carell lives in. They're drugging him and forcing him to be there. They're tying him to this torture board, and if you looked at the pictures of it, it's got the handcuffs on it, it's got the restraints tied into it. They're sexually assaulting these kids for hours or even days now. Letting them write letters, letting them call home. They're strangling them, they're shooting them with the 22, which that's got to be loud in the apartment. And they're tying them up with plastic and disposing them. And so we really don't have time during the episode to go into all of these homicides, but in 70, you've got a hitchhiker that's strangled to death, you've got somebody lured from a rally, you've got somebody else that was strangled and placed in the boat shed, and all of these show us a killer's profile of a killer that's motivated by, like you said earlier, power, control, possession, and I think that's what he was demonstrating as a teenager to those young boys he was inviting to the candy factory, right? So they saw that nice, happy side of him, but growing within him was that sadistic urge to rape and torture and kill. And we certainly saw that as he groomed Brooks. I don't know Henley had to be groomed that much, which is even scarier because that means Henley was predisposed to this. But Carell certainly dehumanized all of his victims. And I think that's really, really important. Throughout 71, we just see victim after victim and victim strangled, killed, taken to the boat shed. And as a matter of fact, I think at the end, they eventually find, I think it's something like 17 bodies that are buried under the boat shed, wrapped in plastic, placed in lime.
And John, these are 15 years old, 13 years old, 13 years old, 16. I mean, these are young men that have either not been out of junior high school or even in high school yet. I mean, it's just,
it's that
terrible.
Can you imagine the parents?
Oh my gosh, all these boys coming up missing.
Yep. In the Houston area with these boys coming up missing constantly. This is a huge number. I know we're talking over a 3-year period now, but this is an absolutely huge number. And if you look at some of those times when they would do a 3-month period with 6 or 7 victims, absolutely crazy.
Well, and 72 is the same way. You have, 5 different victims in 72 that were strangled, shot, bludgeoned, 16 years old, 17 years old, 18. You have more victims in 72, again, shot, strangled, put in the boat shed at 18 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old. I mean, these guys were killing all the time, John.
Yeah, they literally were. No, you're exactly right, Brandy. We know that there were at least 28 murders between 70 and 73. The boys were 13 to 20, young boys like you're talking about. I can't imagine the feeling of the parents out there. They were lured into given a ride in the van and taken to the apartment. They identified 27 of them, never did identify the 28th. But really, authorities are going to find out later that it's probably way more than 27, 28, or 29, because authorities, when they went back and looked at some of the records, found that of the known reported, and Brandy, a lot of this doesn't get reported.
That's right.
There were 42 missing person reports on teenagers. And what about the kids that are 18, 19, and 20? Well, there probably aren't missing person reports on them. They're adults and they're on their own now. So can you imagine how high this number probably got? Matter of fact, it got so bad that the boathouse where they were burying the kids got so filled, they started taking them to a beach
Yes.
and to Carell's family home on Lake Sam Rayburn. So you've
Yes.
got victims now in multiple areas that during this 3-year period of time, it's absolutely ridiculous how many boys are disappearing and falling victim at the hands of this trio. Hi, I'm John Matthews, your host of the True Crime and Wine podcast, and we invite you to join us on all of our social media channels at JJ True Crime and Wine. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and we thank you for listening or watching our podcast as it's expanded over the last year. We're now featured on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on iHeartRadio, and on YouTube. So whatever platform you enjoy True Crime and Wine, make sure you give us a like or subscribe and pass it on to all of your friends and true crime lovers to join us at True Crime and Wine. Salute.
Well, and you know what? I also find it very interesting that he never left the area, that he consistently stayed in the area to commit these crimes. Even when the body count got so big to keep putting them in the boat shed, he would just move the location of where he was going to put the bodies, not actually go and commit these crimes. And so, yeah, I see someone who, I mean, they are literally killing all the time. I mean, in 73, John, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more victims. And because he was burying them in multiple locations, that's why I have never believed, going through this case and this guy, that they have ever all been found, that we really know how many true victims there are. And not only that, how many more sexual assaults he committed that were either never reported. Shame that boys don't want to come forward when that kind of thing happens to them. So the victim count in my eyes in all of this is endless.
The number of felonies may have been in the hundreds, right?
Yes.
Kidnapping, rape, torture, and then murder. And I agree. I'm not sure if we're going to know the total number of victims, but I am positive that the number of victims is going to continue to increase as we find more bodies, as we do DNA testing, more sophisticated DNA testing, and link them to these crimes. From a profiling standpoint, obviously, geographic profiling, the apartments he had on San Felipe Drive and Lamar Drive were two main areas that was obviously his comfort zone. He certainly had he would kill them there in the apartments, and that was where he was comfortable. And then he disposed the bodies in the boat shed at Highland Beach, at Lake Sam Rayburn, at Jefferson Beach. And, I think right there is over 20 bodies just at those 4 locations. And unfortunately, as we know, there's lots of locations, lots of bayous around Houston where you can dump a body and get away with it. And so, from a profiling standpoint, it again is pretty straightforward. Carell is your traditional serial killer, organized planning, possessive control, charming, narcissistic. Brooks, I think, more of a submissive, less dominant personality, might have been doing it for money, might have been doing it for love of Carell. Henley, I think you start seeing, though, that really sadistic personality. And that kind of brings us up to the last victim that we know about, August 3rd, the white male, 13, in 1973. He was riding his bike, collecting bottles to sell to get some money. He goes to Carell's house, and then he calls his parents and says, hey, they're having pizza, and he'll be home later. And Carell spends 45 minutes with him, feeding him pizza before he attacks him. So we know that with this last victim, he puts him on the torture board, rapes him, tortures him, strangles him, and buries him in the boat shed. And so August 3rd, that's the last confirmed murder that we know of, because just 5 days later, it all begins to unravel.
Yeah, August 8th, 1973, Henley picks up Timothy Curley, white male, 20 years old, basically to bring to Corell to be his next victim. So the pair parties, so the two guys are together. They
Yep.
party a little bit before going to Corell's house. But while on the way to Corell's house, they run into a female, Rhonda Williams, white female, 15 years old. So she is running away from her abusive father and basically just decides to join them. So she joins them. They're all going to Corell's house. They all arrive there. And he is very upset at Henley for bringing the female and told him, you ruined everything. Henley's apologetic, tells Corell, I'm sorry. Corell seemed to keep his cool down a little bit. Everyone's drinking, getting high. Corell is sniffing paint. Okay.
No, everybody but Corell.
Oh, everybody's sniffing
Yeah.
paint but Corell. Okay, I was about to say, that gets in your mind altering state. So keeping that control piece of it. So he's not happy about the female being there. Now he has more than one person brought to him. How do you keep these two people under control? Well, Henley knows these people. And so how is this interaction happening, John?
Well, this is really where it all falls apart. Corell's got a plan, right? And for 3 years, they've stuck to the plan. They recruit him, they lure him, they put him in a van, they take him to the apartment, they drug him, they put him on the torture board, rape him, torture him, and kill him. Repeat, repeat, repeat. They've got a plan. Now, all of a sudden, Henley has thrown the largest monkey wrench into the works you could imagine. He brought a young female in, which Corell has absolutely no use for, but it's another victim. It's another witness. All of a sudden, she comes into the picture. Corell goes crazy. He's furious with Henley, but like you said, he calms down. They smoke a little. They drink a little. The other three start sniffing paint, and that's what Corell wanted. When Henley wakes up, Corell has him handcuffed to the torture board, as well as the other two. The young male that Henley brought and the female are already tied up and gagged. And Corell says, I'm going to kill all three of you.
Yep.
For whatever reason, he undoes Henley's gag to listen to him. And Henley is persuasive at this point. After about 30 minutes, he talks Corell into, let me go. You know I'm your friend. I've helped you with all these other murders. We'll rape him and kill him together. So Corell begins raping Curley, the young man. Mm-hmm. Well, Williams at this point is screaming to Henley, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Aren't you going to do anything? Mm-hmm. I think the pressure of the third party, I think a young girl, a girl that had been abused, and Henley just lost it. And he tells Corell, you got to stop. And Corell's like, no, I'm going to rape him and kill him, and then I'm going to rape her and kill her. And then Henley grabs Corell's gun and points it at him and tells him, you can't kill my friends. So now all of a sudden, Henley is perceiving these two people, because he partied with one, he felt sorry for the other, as friends. Yeah. And Corell goes, well, then just kill me, Wayne. And Henley's pointing the gun at Corell. Corell's yelling and screaming, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to rape him. And he's almost taunting him. And then he tells Henley, you know you won't do it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Henley pulls the trigger. He shoots him in the forehead. He then shoots him, and it seems to like glaze off his forehead. And then he shoots him in the chest, and then he shoots him in the back. And Corell is still coming at him. He's naked. He's gotten off of his victim, and he's coming at Henley. Henley shoots him 3 more times. Until his naked dead body falls to the floor.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of anger built up, a lot of frustration. Maybe he has been feeling the pressure of what Carell has been doing. Maybe it took a female, someone who was erratic.
I think the girl was the whole difference. Here, let me just kind of wrap this up. Henley, Curley, and Williams, the young man and young woman that Henley brought, teenagers, they decided, what do we do now that, we got a dead person here? And they decide to call the police. They literally put the gun down in the driveway and they sit on the curb waiting for the Pasadena police to arrive. They tell him what happened. Henley confesses to shooting Carell and then starts telling him about the other murders. Well, the Pasadena police didn't believe Henley. They thought it was just some drugged up kid at a drug party who had a drug shooting, and he didn't believe him at all.
Wow.
Finally, he insists that, no, I helped kill all these other people, and he started naming names. Well, Pasadena police contacted Houston, and Houston goes, yeah, we've got this person is missing, this person is missing, this person is missing. And they go, oh, my God, this may be the kid or the group that has been kidnapping and killing our Houston teenagers for years. They finally believe Henley, and he leads them to 27 bodies that they discover over the next week. Now,
John, they are finding these bodies. They are digging them up. They're even, the two accomplices tell police that they had buried them in some of the beach area. I mean, and again, will they ever really know how many? I'm not sure, but I mean, I can't even imagine how police felt starting to not only, you're uncovering bodies that are covered in lime and cement, children that are 13 years old. I mean, it just had to really take a toll. And I don't think they realized what they were dealing with until they started finding all these bodies.
Yeah, absolutely horrific. And then Brooks, is brought into it because Henley tells the police about Brooks. And Brooks and his dad that evening, the same day, August 8th, go to the police department. They turn themselves in. Initially, Brooks says, I didn't have anything to do with the murders. I was just there. I'm a victim. Yeah. But by August 10th, he admits to personally killing at least 9 of the victims and helping with numerous others. The police now know that Carell is a serial killer. They're searching his house, his van, his boat shed. They're finding the plastic wrap. They're finding the rope. They're finding everything, all of the tools that they were using to kill and torture these young people. And during this, Henley is taking the police to all of these disposal sites. And eventually, you've got Carell dead now, and Henley and Brooks are both indicted. Henley with 6 murders, Brooks with 4. They're convicted of all of the murders, and they're sentenced to life in prison. I think it's Brooks eventually dies during COVID, if I remember right. I did maybe Henley, but both of them were sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole. And, as we said, was justice served? Carell was dead, so that at least seems a bit of justice being served. Brooks and Henley never saw the light of day, so they spent the rest of their life in jail. But as we talked about, with DNA technology, with the discovery of new sciences that we have, we're finding other bodies. We're tying other bodies to this group of murderers. And I think the body count from 28 or 29 is just going to continue to grow and grow as science becomes more advanced. We're tying more victims to the Candyman and his accomplices. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all of our listeners you can follow us on our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine. If you want to purchase wine and enjoy it with us as we're profiling on the True Crime and Wine podcast, you can go to CasaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com. You can enjoy some wine and profile along with Brandy and I. So I think that wraps up our business for today. And of course, I want to thank my co-host Brandy Diamond for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedso. Absolutely fantastic. Lauren, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping to make the show possible. And I invite you to join us for our next episode, where we feature a serial killer nicknamed the Blue-Eyed Devil, who was responsible for over 24 murders. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.